Next section is the section that our audience may not be as familiar with. It isn't read every time there's a celebration of the Lord's Supper. In fact, it is rarely read.
Right. They don't want to read it.
They don't want to read it because, number one, if they take it seriously, they don't want to read it. But if they don't take it seriously, they don't know what to do with it.
Right.
Which I didn't as a Presbyterian pastor. Let me read it again, Father, and then go ahead and comment, beginning in verse 27. Whoever, therefore, eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of profaning the body and blood of the Lord. Let a man examine himself, and so eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For anyone who eats and drinks without discerning the body eats and drinks judgment upon himself. That is why many of you are weak and ill, and some have died. Let's pause there, Father.
Yeah. Again, that's, as you said, as Protestants, we got to a point where, what do we do with this? How do we explain this? How do we incorporate this in any sense? Because, it's
if it's
there.
just a symbol.
Yeah, if we're just eating a cracker and drinking some juice, as I did when I was 13 years old, then, how do I bring this into reality? How do I deal with this? But yet we know that there are venial sins and mortal sins because John tells us so. But now what do we do with it? And I think the key here is that discernment before it happens. That we need, and maybe that's the real warning that St. Paul is telling us. We need to discern our own souls and see what needs to be taken care of. And as it says in the gospel, if you come bearing gifts to the altar and you have something against a brother or someone else, you need to go and resolve that. Leave your gifts at the altar and go and resolve that. And maybe that's what St. Paul is telling us. But again, if this was symbol, it wouldn't matter what we did with this. But he's really warning us that this is not symbol, because there's been death attributed to this.
Yeah, and I remember that passage as well as all of these, but I remember that one, 30. This is why many of you are weak and ill, and some have died.
Mm-hmm.
See, I remember in my own theology kind of basically saying Paul goofed here.
Yeah.
In other words, well, we know in the Old Testament that people, quote, misunderstood, end of quote, when something bad would happen, they must have sinned.
Right.
And even Jesus dealt with that when
right.
he asked, well, when that tower fell on those people was because of their sin. So basically, it's not a direct connector. So, well, Paul must have messed up here. We do that. We're kind of lifting ourselves up. We think we know better than Paul.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
It's too bad Paul wasn't as wise as me to understand. No, wait, this is Scripture, and it's Paul.
Right.
So what does he mean? He means that in the same way, right, Father, like in Acts chapter 4, I think it was, when Ananias and Sapphira sold a bunch of stuff but lied about it and
right.
got zapped.
Right.
It doesn't mean every time for the rest of Christian history, every time that happens, but there was a warning there.
Right. Well, and it's just the same way as they're bringing the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, and it starts to fall off the wagon, and a man stops it, and he is killed. That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody that touches it is going to die, but on this particular case, at this point in time, this was the warning.
Yeah. And in this case, he is saying that awakening these people to really what's going on there. Now, it seems that there's two things going on here,
mm-hmm.
Father Andy. One, there's the need to deal with what you bring to the Eucharist. So in other words, you're not coming in an unworthy manner.
Right.
And then the second thing is in the context of the Eucharist, the discerning of the body.
Right. And
both are important.
Both are important. You cannot get away from either one. We need to discern who we are, and again, we need to unite the body. This unites the body again. This brings us all together. This is our unifying force here in this, and that warning means to take this seriously, not to move this off in another direction. I'll never forget is when I was a deacon in the Baptist church, I once asked the pastor about communion. I said, we use unleavened bread because that's what they used, but we have, and I was at the time filling these little cups with grape juice. I said, but Jesus used wine. And he said, oh, I don't think so. He said, I think what Jesus really used was grape juice. And I'm thinking, no self-respecting Jew would be caught dead drinking grape juice at Passover. It just